Today is July 28th, 2006. I am Jessica Clark. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Regina, Saskatchewan, in Canada. To start with, can you state your name?
My name is Christina Krismer, Bast being my maiden name. I was born just outside of Regina here in a rural area between the two towns of Sedley and Lejord. And of course I was one of the first, or I'm the oldest of 6 children. 3 of us, the 3 older ones, were born on the farm. The 3 younger ones were born in a hospital. And the attending physician was our local community area doctor, which we always thought was kind of a rarity to have somebody that close.
And what year were you born in?
1937.
Okay.
At the end of the Depression, probably one of the worst years of the Depression, probably too.
And how far was your farm from Regina?
The farm is probably about 30-35 miles from Regina, down what we call Highway 33.
Okay. You had mentioned that a doctor came out and assisted in your birth. Do you know any stories about your birth?
As far as my birth is concerned, no. I have no idea what went on. The only thing I can think of in terms of the births of the 3 of us on the farm, that I spent a fair amount of time at my grandparents' place because obviously we had to get out of there when there was another one being born or whatever. I'm not exactly sure what the process was, but I remember spending a fair amount of time with my grandparents and being with them.
Were those your maternal grandparents?
My dad's grandparents.
Okay. What were their names?
Their names were Rochus and Christina, and of course Christina is why I have the name. That was her name. I understand I was named after her or because of her. A very nice, gentle woman. Grandpa was a different kind of a person. He was a little more autocratic. Grandpa ruled the roost and things went the way Grandpa wanted them to do. And I understand that that's very traditional in terms of the family, as the family operated.
So do you know your grandparents' family history? You know, if they came from Russia to Canada, or?
Yes, I've done a little bit of a history on my mother's side, and of course in terms of my dad's side, that's the project that's on the go now that doesn't seem to be getting very far because of other things. But yes, they came from the little town of München, or the community of München in Russia, and also Grandma came from Rastatt. So, but in terms of anything that I've been able to find about them positively, anything beyond that, no. From an aunt, I do know that they have come, or they came, from Russia to Canada through Bremen, and then from Bremen into New York, and took the train from Chicago to Winnipeg, and Winnipeg to Regina, and that was in the year of 1890. Now, grandmother came the following year. This would have been Grandpa that came that year, and Grandma came the following year. But why they came, who encouraged them, that part, I have no idea. Whether they felt that they, like a lot of the people leaving, had to get out of there if they were going to have any future for their families. Grandpa was 7 years of age when he came. Grandma was 6 when she came. And Grandpa was the oldest in the family. So I'm thinking, 7, and he had a brother who was 6. Somebody, I expect, they got some information from others who had come just a little earlier and felt maybe they should get out. But that's sort of speculation on my part, knowing what was going on at the time.
Did they ever talk to you about what their life was like in Russia? Or?
That's really a strange thing, because I grew up, let me get this in, I grew up sort of under the little kids are to be seen but not heard. And so in terms of being encouraged to ask questions, no, we didn't ask questions. We would eavesdrop at certain times, But really, we weren't supposed to know this, and we didn't ask questions. If we heard something, we didn't ask, well, what do you mean by that? You know, the kids would ask you that today. Well, what do you mean, Grandma? Or what do you mean, Mom? That definitely was not the case. And of course, when we were out playing or doing or visiting, the adults would be visiting in the parlor or something, or the men would be visiting, and the women would be visiting in the kitchen. And the kids would be off doing something. I'm not sure what I did when I went visiting. I'm not even sure what I did when I went there to stay. The things I remember of my times there would be, meal times were great. I know Grandpa Bast had a huge table in his kitchen, and it was an unusual one because it was 3 slabs of marble put together to make this big long table. And when he left the farm later on, each of his sons got one of those slabs of marble. Now, where the marble came from or how we got it, that I don't know. And of course, the next thing I remember is that after supper, we all had to kneel down and say the rosary. We all had to pray. And I used to think, oh, my knees are so sore. I can't do this. But everything happened also in the kitchen. The parlor was hardly, or the living room, as we would call it today, was hardly ever used, really.
You mentioned praying the rosary and your knees getting sore from...
And that's a kid doing that, yeah.
But how long would the rosary...
take?
Yeah.
Probably not very long. I think at the most 10, 15 minutes. Mind you, then, now that I think about this, we had to do a little more because after the rosary was said, then we would have to say the Litany of the Saints. What else? I think that was it. And of course, you know, St. Joseph, pray for us. St. Mary, pray for us. You know, it was kind of like bum, bum, bum. And it was kind of a beat that you would end up going through. And, you know, kids don't like that when you're forced to have to do something that be another kind of thing that kids, you know, you're not free to go and do what you want to. And of course for that, after that, and this would have been probably typical in Grandpa's house, because I think the same thing sort of happened later on when Grandma and Grandpa were in Regina, when they moved to Regina or came back from the east and went to Regina. I still stayed with them a lot during the summer holidays. I spent a lot of time with my grandparents, I guess. And I'd be in bed by 7 o'clock at night. I mean, bedtime was early. And my last episode that I remember would have been when my youngest living sister was born. I was in bed already when Dad came back from the hospital to see Grandma and Grandpa to tell them that he had another daughter. And again, you see, a kid hears but doesn't come running out to ask questions. Kids to be seen but not heard sort of thing. So I listened very carefully for all this information and supposedly then went to sleep. But I was in bed already when he got to the house. Now, in terms of getting up earlier in the morning, I can't really remember what time we got up. But I do know that it was early to bed.
So, your Grandma Bast, was she a good cook? You said you remembered meal times. Was she?
Yes, she was a good cook. She was a very good cook. She didn't necessarily, I don't think, do a lot of different things, but whatever she did was well done. We certainly had kuchen that she made, and I'm not sure if the kuchen we had is the same as other people's, looking at the recipes from that Michael has had on the internet. Our kuchen was made, well, we could make it with sour cream or with sweet cream, and most often ours was a sweet cream or sour cream base, because although we had cream on the farm, you wanted a use for the cream when it wasn't sweet anymore, and so we used sour cream. And my recipe that I have makes a very big batch. In fact, my sisters who've now got the recipe have said that it makes just too big a batch, so they cut it in half. I can make, at least three 9 by 12 pans at one time with the recipe. So, I mean, it's not a small batch, it's a big batch. And we've made all kinds of different kuchens, the straight, what I call brown sugar and cinnamon, or sugar and cinnamon kuchen spread on the top. Or in fall, we my favorite is what I call peach kuchen, which we slice peaches onto the top and then pour some sweet cream on top and let the cream bake with the stuff inside. But then there's a plum one also that we have. So, I mean, those are about the basic ones that we've used. My mother, however, on the other side, although she made it too, brought with her and made, and I'm going off on another tangent here, I guess, something called placenta. And that was a sweet foundation dough that would be filled with cooked apricots and then closed up and sliced almost like, not like cinnamon twist, cinnamon roll, but something like a dough similar to that. And then just cooked, baked, and had a filling in it. I think some people may have used a poppy seed filling. That may have been another, but I know Mom made we called the apricot placenta.
Going back to your grandparents on the Bast side, do you have any other memories of them from when you were a kid?
What are the memories? Well, Grandpa was a very strict man. And although he was strict and he was very hard on my father, because you see, and I think the big thing that I remember from him is that my dad really was supposed to have been a priest, okay? And I'll backtrack a bit. Grandpa and Grandma had 9 children, 3 boys and 6 girls, yeah. And of the 6 girls that were born, 4 of them became nuns. They joined the Loretta Sister Order, and the order is housed in Toronto. Of the 3 boys, I understand, even right from the very first one down, he was supposed to be a priest. Dad was a twin, and so he was supposed to have been a priest, and he was sent to St. Anthony's College in Edmonton with the Franciscan priests. And the idea, I think, was that he would eventually join the order or become part of that order. But Dad decided that really wasn't where he wanted to go. The youngest boy in the family was also told, and this I have from him. Dad didn't talk much about it other than we knew that when Dad said he wasn't going, Grandpa said, okay, you're coming home and you're working. And I understand Grandpa was very hard on Dad. And my aunts have said much the same thing, that he was almost cruel towards my dad. But, I mean, that didn't, as kids, that didn't affect our really, and Grandpa was good to us. And hearing the stories that I hear now, I'm often amazed at the good feelings I have about them. You know, I'm hearing about how mean he was to Dad and how he did all kinds of, father-son conflict things. And yet, as far as we were concerned as kids, and I spent time there, so to me, he didn't appear to be the kind of a guy that, yes, he was the ruler of the household and things went the way he said, but he was good to us as grandchildren. I can remember in Regina going to church with him, and at that time, of course, there were the wooden sidewalks, and he walked very quickly, and I had a hard time keeping up to him. And then and after the concrete sidewalks came, I think I often played the game while I tried to keep up with him, step on a crack, break your mother's back, so I didn't have to did everything I could not to step on a crack. No, other than that, specifically at this point, I don't, Grandma used to come and stay with us in the summertime, and she would make noodles for us, egg noodles. Mom didn't feel that she made them as well as Grandma did, so Grandma would come and make egg noodles for us, and she'd roll them out and cut them up, and Mom said she couldn't cut them as finely as Grandma did at all, and she made very nice egg noodles. Let's see, what else can I remember about that? That, I think, is probably most of what I remember of them. We also got, for Christmas, we would get a $1 bill, a chocolate bar, And that may have been Christmases and birthdays. And I remember getting a knife, a fork, or a spoon. I was a girl, you see, and so I suppose in some ways you could say setting up a dowry, or for your hope chest, as some people would call it, getting a knife, fork, or spoon. That would be part of my package. But other than those, in terms of other gifts, I don't, no, nothing specific like that at all. No, that probably is what I remember most of them.
On your mom's side, what were your grandparents' names?
My mother's parents were Jacob and Elizabeth.
And their last name?
Jacob Geis, Geis, and Elizabeth was a Wormsbecker, Wormsbecker.
That's a name.
Yeah, yeah.
Did you know them?
Yes.
Can you tell me something about them?
What do I know? Okay, I don't remember an awful lot about Grandpa because I was about 7 years old when Grandpa died. Mom is the youngest in a family of 10. Her oldest sister is almost 20 years older than she is. And so that is a family that is very spread out, and in fact there are aunts on that side that I never got to know. They moved away into another area of the province, and of course in that time, 1920, 1930, travel was very limited, and so there's at least the one family, and I only really have met some of those family members since my last uncle, or the last living brother-sister on Mom's side, died, and I then decided to do some work on the family tree and got to know them. On Grandma's side, there were people in the community that were related. Her brothers and sisters had families, and so cousins, we knew those. Grandpa, I really didn't know much about him. I always thought of him as a, not really an orphan, but the only person of that family that was here. I knew of no other relatives around at all. He was 71 when I was 7, so, and the other thing I remember about him, and this is kind of strange and funny, but when we would go to visit them, the men would sit in the, well, it wasn't even the parlor, it was the dining room in this, it was a very nice house that he had, that he'd built for his wife and his family. And they would be visiting in there. The parlor was hardly ever used in that house. And we, the girls and the kids and the mamas, would be in the kitchen. And Grandpa used a spittoon. And that's the other thing I remember, of course, in that particular household is his kids sneaking upstairs and sliding down the banister. And if we ever got caught, oh, we were given a licking. Grandpa would just be furious. We weren't supposed to be doing that kind of thing. But it was just a great thing to slide down the banister. Oh, we really liked that. Grandma, on the other side, was a very quiet, gentle woman. I think she was a good cook too, but because she was so much older, and I'm sure she had to have been because Mom was an excellent cook, and Mom loved cooking. And maybe that's one of the reasons why some of that sort of thing is passed on even traditionally, as far as I'm concerned. But yeah, Grandma was quiet. She tended the garden, tended her chickens. Stories I've heard are that, Grandpa, I've sort of come to the conclusion that Grandpa probably really wasn't a farmer. He would have liked to have done something else, because I understand he would go out to the field, and when he came in from the field, Grandma would have to tend to the horses and put them away, and still do the things in the yard, and like chickens and family and whatnot. It was a yard that was not very well how do I want to call it, decorated. It was a house with a garden beside it and some buildings, but it wasn't a yard like I think of a yard should be. And I compare it to my dad's yard, trees and sort of a fence around and a fence around the garden. But that wasn't, this was like a farm that sat out there in the middle of nowhere without any, the fields came right next to the house on the one side. And yet it was a gorgeous house. It was, and some of the pictures I can show you later would be, will indicate some of that. But perhaps because they were a little older, a little more tired maybe, I don't know. But of a different nature in many ways than my dad's family. Grandpa and Grandma were much more quiet. And in terms of the importance or the significance of religion in the house, if I compare the two families, it wasn't the same at all. I mean, it wasn't that they didn't go to church or anything like that, but the emphasis, I didn't as a kid, but then I didn't spend a lot of time there either. So, but he was more of a social man and became involved in local politics. He was part of the group responsible for the organization of the local school. He was on the rural municipality board, and so he did those kinds of things. And I'm told that he was also young people liked him, but my feeling sort of is that I don't think he really was a farmer. He didn't really want to be a farmer, but he had to have a living, and there wasn't a living in anything else. So that was where he. Now, to go a little further with that, I suppose I should too. Since I started doing the family history on that side, I have learned that he had a half-brother that lived 2.5 miles from where he was. I did not know they existed, the half-brother and his family. And it's just since the history's been done that I've gotten to know some of that family. And of course, that family also was a little older, and I have some pictures of that family. That I didn't know them either. The youngest, and that lady is someone I have met when my uncle died, and that's somebody we maybe could have even talked to a bit too. I just forgot all about her. Yeah, but and it's from her that I've gotten some stories about how Grandpa would walk 2.5 miles across the country a couple of times a week, go have a visit with his brother. But I knew nothing about the family. Now I understand my brother knew about it, but then he was there on the farm. And of course for me, and this is where a little bit of a peculiarity comes in, I really left home when I was very young. I was 14. And when I say left home, because I did my high school, I stayed at a boarding school. And so I did my grade 9 to grade 11 staying in this convent. And I got home once a month at the end of the month. We had month-end, what we call month-end leaves. So at a stage when you want to start asking a lot of questions, I wasn't home with the family, and so my time and my environment was completely different. And then in grade 12, when my brother and sister were old enough to go to grade 9, then Dad took us to school every day and drove us. Otherwise, it was cheaper for my parents for me to stay in the convent than it was for them to drive me to school every day, is really what it amounted to. Then when I was finished high school, I went off to university. So when I start thinking about it, from about the age of 14, I'm really gone. And so do I really get to know any of the family or a lot of the relatives where you have a bigger opportunity to want to maybe ask questions too? I'm not there at that time. Otherwise I'm a kid. Now, as families, we visited and back and forth and off. Sunday was a day of rest, and Sunday was a day of visitation. So if we didn't go somewhere, they came to our place, and there was always something planned. Now, when we came home from church, Dad may have had a half-hour snooze or something, but if nobody had arrived by the time a certain time came, it would be, okay, let's go have a visit this afternoon. And nobody asked anybody ahead of time if we can come to visit you, which is different than what we you don't go see anybody today without saying, are you guys busy tonight? Can we come over? Company showed up, and you were prepared for people to stay for supper. That was the other thing. So Saturday afternoon, it wasn't unusual for me to have to be, and this part I remember at home, have to go out and kill 2 or 3 chickens and clean them and have them ready for dinner, for Sunday dinner. And it might be Saturday afternoon, and we might have decided that, okay, tomorrow afternoon, somehow we got contact with somebody, we're going to go over to Indian Head and have a picnic in the forestry farm. I don't recall doing a lot of planning for that. Now, I do know that when I had an aunt who came visiting from Toronto, that probably was planned, and so the family all got together at the forestry farm. And of course it was, okay, a couple of chickens killed and fried and ready in the roaster, and potato salad made, and away we went. But certainly Sunday was company day, and as kids we played ball. Cousins would come and we'd be out there. We didn't play regular softball. It was kind of what we called hit flies. Somebody would bat the ball and the others would catch it. 500, I guess, is what we called it. And you caught, every ball you caught as a flyer was 100, and if it was a grounder, it was 25, I think, or something like that. And if you missed, I can't remember what happened if we dropped it. But that's where we learned to play ball. And later then, of course, played ball on ball teams in the community for what we called sports days. Hide and seek was another one that we often played, and particularly at night. And of course, my brother had one particular incident while he was being caught, ran through a barbed wire fence and cut his forehead, which kind of was scary. And I had the neat habit of always having to, somewhere along the line, at least once a summer, I twisted an ankle and then would visit. And that to me always was kind of funny, because I twisted my ankle and I couldn't walk, so in I went to the chiropractor. And I didn't know he was a chiropractor. I just knew his name as Dr. Stutzberger. And it was only later on that I realized he was a chiropractor, and he would put the dislocated bone. I never broke anything. I had a bone that would dislocate, and he would push it back into place. But I was the klutz, and at least in that part, and Mom does say that, as I was growing up, she did have to, with me, always have to have me in good shoes. She could never buy a cheap shoe for me. She always had to get me good shoes. And, what started that or what prompted that before that, that she knew that or why, I have no idea, but obviously she knew that part. As kids, we did all kinds of things. I had episodes on the farm of my sister particularly, but my brother would be with her, setting fires. Oh yes, we loved matches. Now, I was the tattletale usually. I was the oldest. So, and I can remember one Saturday in particular, I was probably 7 or 8 by then, 9. And I was helping Mom with what was the usual routine of stripping the beds on Saturday and putting clean bedding out, and then an extra special dusting and mopping, which was a usual Saturday cleanup, being with her. And my brother came running into the house and said, Mom, there's a fire. And my sister was hiding under the well. The well had a platform, and she was hiding under the platform. And so we went out and put out a fire. And I can remember trying one behind a granary. And you think about it now, fields going, the whole farmyard going, because we loved matches. I was probably about 5 or 6 at the episode of, like all kids, we need to balance, and you walk on narrow things. Well, I was walking on what was known as a harrow hitch, and I was walking along the beam and fell off and cut my ear. I got to remember which one it is. And cut the bottom part of my ear, and the little piece was just hanging up there. And Mom took just tape and taped it up. I never had a stitch on it. The scar is there, but it's hardly visible. That was my sort of memory of doing something maybe in essence that I should. My brother and sister, Dad had what was called an oil shed, where he would keep his grease and his oil for his machinery. And one hot day, my brother and sister got the idea they needed to cool down. So my brother stood under the oil tap, and my sister pumped. And they were both covered in oil. My sister was a bit of a devil.
How much younger than you was she?
She's 3 years younger than I am.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, and those two were close. Like there's 2 years between my brother and myself. Those two were just a little over a year apart, and they were thick as thieves all the time. They were into everything together. You know, they were sort of a team, and I was always the outsider. I was the oldest one. I was the boss. But by nature, still not the same kind of personality that she is. I certainly am much more serious.
So you said there were 6 kids in your family?
Yeah, we were the 3 oldest ones. Okay, we were in threes.
Can you take me from oldest to youngest with their
Okay.
names?
I'm the oldest, and then my brother Gabriel, and then my sister Bernice, and then there's about 5 years, and then my sister Marguerite, and then a sister Elizabeth Elaine, we call her Elaine, and a sister Dorothy, and then after her, the youngest sister who died when she was 11 years old, and that I remember very well. So there were really 7 of us, but six living children with 5 girls and 1 boy.
Can you tell me a little bit about your
Youngest sister?
Mm-hmm.
When she was born, she ended up staying in the hospital a little longer than usual, which, of course, I don't really, at that time, Dad would come home and say, well, the baby's not quite ready to come home. I do know that when they came home from the hospital, it would have been a Saturday or a Sunday, no, Friday or a Saturday, and that Mom did say that she wanted to have that baby baptized right away. Mom was very uneasy about the baby. And so I went with them when she was baptized that Sunday. And Monday afternoon, when I came home from school, the baby was crying. And she had cried before a bit too. And I sensed that Mom was uncomfortable or wasn't quite content with the way things were. And so when I came home from school, the baby was crying, and I asked Mom, what's the matter? And I don't remember Mom's answer, but I do remember going into the living room, and we had a cradle that Grandpa had made, and rocking her, and spending time rocking her. And she seemed to be, she settled down with that. And then the next morning, about 5:30, 6 o'clock, I did wake, and I knew Mom was, attending to the baby. Now, I understand the baby was having, and did have, some convulsions. And that was about the time that she died, about 6 o'clock in the morning. And so I helped Mom bathe her and dress her for the funeral. 2 days later? But she was, she was not taken into the city to a funeral home to be embalmed or anything like that. And it was like a doll. It was like dressing a doll. It was a really weird, in some ways, feeling. And of course, myself, sister, Bernice, and 2 other girls from the community, my girlfriend and a friend of my sister's, we were the pallbearers. 4 girls carried the coffin. But I certainly was, I would have been 11. So all I know is I see the pictures and I'm crying like crazy. But that's me. That's me.
Do you remember the funeral service?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was the funeral service like?
It was a Catholic mass, and but there weren't the that's basically what I remember of that part of it. And Uncle carried the coffin out of the church by himself, and then we carried it from the church to the cemetery, and then the usual Catholic ritual. But because it was a child, there it weren't the kinds of things that are used with a adult burial. It was a child, and it wasn't, the child hadn't done any wrong yet. It was an innocent person, so it was a much more gentle funeral at that time than a funeral would have been. For example, I remember my grandpa's funeral, my mother's father when he died. That was, or
You
even
were
my,
7 at that
I
time?
was 7 when he died, and of course, what I remember of his funeral now, and I start talking about funerals, is I remember the wake, and the body was at the farm, and the body was in the parlor, and everybody spending time with the body and praying and whatnot at that time. And I remember being kind of in the background and kind of pulling back, and what happens if he sits up? And again, this is where I think you, as kids, you hear stories and somebody has said something about, the physical reaction, because at that, I don't believe, now I'm not sure, but I don't believe he was embalmed either, and I don't know if embalming was a practice at that time in terms of health, public health rules and regulations. So, but I still obviously have heard stories about muscle delayed reaction and bodies sitting up, just stories, and that was my absolute fear. I was just afraid that, what would I do if he sat up? They're laying there and their hands are crossed and whatnot, and they're prepared. But what happens if he? But that didn't happen with my sister. It was a different kind of. To me, at that point, with her, seeing her, and dressing her was like dressing a doll. And it wasn't the same kind of. It was sadness, yes, but not the same kind that. Everybody's, I don't know, it was just a totally different feeling for me. And again, I'm talking now between the ages 7 with Grandpa and 11 with my sister, and then my dad's parents dying. I mean, I was older when they died, but though I'm talking about childhood kind of memories of funerals and stuff. And for him, I just remember that the mass was said, or funeral was conducted from a little chapel that was right next to the cemetery, and I remember coming out of the church to go to the cemetery. So those are the 2 little parts of that funeral that I remember. Being in the parlor as people prayed with the body in the wake, and then coming out of the chapel and taking the body to the grave. That's more than that. I don't remember of him at all, or his funeral. The rest of the family doesn't remember it at all. And that's his funeral. And of course, I wasn't there for the actual funeral when Grandma died, which was a number of years later.
You had talked a little bit about some of the mischief your brothers and sisters would get into. Can you, I can't remember the sister that's closest to you. The one
Bernice.
Bernice. Can you tell me a little bit about her? What she was like when you were a child?
I guess in some ways we could have called her the mischief ringleader. She would always have something, and even today she's a fairly creative and daring kind of an individual. We made lots of mud cakes as kids. We put them out in the sun to bake. Like this hot weather that we've had this week would have been ideal for baking our mud cakes that we made. We weren't bad kids, and she wasn't a bad kid. It's just she always had something idea to do something, trying something, and matches, the fires. That was the predominant thing, I think. Now, again, you see, I'm 14 when I go to the convent. She's 11. And after that, I don't see much. So what I know of her now is, as an older girl growing up, when she went to university. And of course, that's kind of an interesting story too. I was the oldest. No girls in the community had gone to university before myself. I was one of the first local girls to go to university. And I remember Dad saying to me, Christina, if you go, the rest are going to follow. And that's going to be an expense. We don't know if we can handle that. So make sure that what you're doing you want to. And then, now that we're going to spend the money on you going to university, you're not going to be able to have a big wedding. And my answer at that point was, I really don't care. So that's not what I'm planning for at this stage. So, yes, she followed me to university. And when she was finished university, she's taught a year, and she went to Europe. She and a couple girlfriends, and this is the kind of, and she spent a year traveling Europe. She and my brother would go to camp. I didn't go to camp. I was older. I had to stay home, and I was probably past camp age by the time they went. They became camp leaders. So they went and got swimming lessons and whatnot, which I didn't. And I'm not bemoaning that. It was just a circumstance of the time and the opportunities that were available at that time. So she and Gabe went to camp, became camp leaders, and continued using those skills in some ways. She went on to education and became a teacher, and went to Europe then that year, came back and taught in Montreal, and took downhill skiing. And in fact, then one Christmas went over to Switzerland, I believe. And again, this is the nature of the girl, you see, in that they were going to plan this trip, and they weren't going to make it a short trip, so she got sick and took sick leave from school, and had somebody they were going to phone to check if she was still sick. But she was in Switzerland skiing. But the irony of all of that was that she broke her leg when she was there. So what's she going to tell them when she comes back to school after Christmas vacation? And I don't know exactly, I can't remember anymore how she covered that. But she came back, and she said she put makeup on her face and powder. She was so pale and hurt. And this is really, because it supposedly had just happened when it had happened sooner than it should have, if she went to Europe to ski when she was supposed to, not during taking a week off earlier. So this is, kind of a daring girl, wasn't afraid to try anything, and wasn't afraid to move around. And quite adventuresome in her approach to life and what she did. Now, following her, of course, there was that 5-year span, and then there were the 3 younger ones, Margie, Elaine, and Dorothy. And so we were always referred to as the 3 older ones and the 3 little ones. Not the 3 big ones and 3 little ones. It's 3 older ones and the 3 little ones. And Dorothy is exactly 10 years younger than I am. And last summer, 2 years ago, I guess, we decided somewhere along the line that we had to have a reunion. And so the sisters got together for a weekend. And it was called the Sisters Weekend. Now, my brother was brought in, but his wife, we really just wanted the get-together, was to be just the 6 of us. And so the husbands for all the girls that were married, myself and Margie and Elaine, well, we went to Elaine's place, but he was working and he wasn't in on it really. And so my brother was to come, but my sister-in-law just couldn't see coming she couldn't have this happen without her being in on it. So it ended up being the Sisters Weekend. My brother was there for a bit, but and we had told her that, this wasn't, at least the 3 little ones planned this, and she wasn't supposed to be there, but we had a good time. We really did. And it was an opportunity for us to get to know each other because, again, the 3 little ones were that much younger than I was, And as Dorothy says, she says, Christina, I did not know you. She says, you were the old, and you know, lots of times when Mom and Dad would go to Regina, I would be babysitting or be responsible, and of course I was the boss then. And that was not, you know, that's how they saw me. They didn't see me as a sister, to do the same kinds of things that they did. And they did, they in some ways were another family because they did things that I didn't do, that I wasn't a part of. Our farm was a grain farm. We had chickens, and we had a couple of cows, and we had, when I was younger, because we needed them, we had horses, but once the horses weren't needed for anything anymore, when roads were good enough to use cars, and certainly other than the first 2 years, I don't think Dad used horses in the fields anymore. I do have a picture of Dad, no, I'm sorry, I have a picture of Dad holding me on the tractor while he was cultivating the garden. Oh yes, and I also have a picture of Dad breaking the garden soil for Mom each spring so she could put her garden in. And he did use horses for that. But that's basically, you know, Dad was not fond of horses. And I think some of that stems from when he was growing up, and he hated horses, really. He hated them. And that's really funny because we have a daughter who loves horses and has actually had over 100 horses on her. And she ran what was called a PMU line, which is the Pregnant Mare's Urine Collection Program, which went on in the States and in Canada, in Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So it's rather ironical to know that he hated them the way he did, to find her really liking them. And he ended up, after our kids were growing up and whatnot, he had 2 horses on his farm. And he's not really a farmer anymore. Well, he's still farming, but Mom's dead. He bought 2 horses just for her. So that, pigs, we had a few pigs. So we had animals on the farm mainly for food purposes. So we'd have a couple of cows, so we would have milk and cream. We'd have chickens, so we'd have eggs. But also, it was a time frame where, with the few cows we had, the cream would be shipped away, and so there was a little bit of an income from Mom with the cream. She sold eggs. I was put through university on turkeys. We had at one point close to 5,000 turkeys on the farm. And that's how Mom and Dad had the money to put me through university, with turkeys. And my first year at university, when I came home at Christmas time, I couldn't come home the first day that I was going to, which would have been about 17th or 18th of December when classes were out. I came home a couple of days later because we had just had a major snowstorm here, and that was the day they were killing turkeys on the farm. So there would have been at least 20 people there, neighbors around to help, and they were all storm stayed on the farm. And the stories I get from them are, you know, the men slept on the floor in the living room, and nobody slept, basically. They were laying on the floor, but nobody slept because everybody was either telling stories or doing something, so nobody really got any sleep. But yes, turkeys were Mom and Dad's. No, you know, there would have been some income, I'm sure, from the grain, but as Mom says, that, and I believe that that's true, that I went through university on turkeys. The money she made from selling the turkeys was money that was used to put me through university, and certainly not the cost that it is today. Perhaps in terms of dollar value at the time, comparable, but yeah, that was their revenue for me.
So your brother, his name's
Gabriel.
Gabriel? You want to tell me a little bit about what he was like when he was a kid?
Oh, he's kind of shy. He's kind of, he's not an aggressive man. He's a gentle man, really, in many ways. A reserved individual. He can be a prankster, and he was a pain in the butt for one reason only, and that probably happened later on when my kids were old enough to be, 7, 8, 9, 10, when we would come to visit, and he would start these stupid water fights. He was terrible for that. And there'd be water all over the place. They'd get the hose and everybody would be absolutely drenched. And I know the year we moved to Regina, I ended up locking the doors because they were coming in the house. If there was any reason for me to get angry at him, that would have been the reason to get angry at him. Water was just, you put a water hose in his hand, and I think to this day you probably could still have that kind of a problem, although he's mellowed a bit. He farms. He played some hockey, and he played some ball, but he wouldn't have been part of the group after the hockey game or after the ball game to get a case of beer and have a good drinking party. To this day, he doesn't drink. And I have no idea why. He just never, ever enjoyed a drink. If there's anything I could get him to drink, or if anything he would drink, would be maybe a glass of a sparkling wine. That would be all.
Talking about...
About Gabe.
Yep.
That's basically about all I can say for him. He's, he's the brother in the family. He's the only one. Everybody calls him pampered and spoiled by the girls.
Did he also get a college education?
No, he did not go to university. He's the only one who didn't. But again, I suppose he felt he wanted to be on the farm. He was going to be on the farm, and so he figured he didn't need it. He was, and he didn't like school. I mean, he wasn't at all like I was, like Bernice was. School was just great. There was nothing like that. I mean, not to say that, I would have wanted to go to school forever, but I enjoyed school. It was a good place to be.
The next in your family was Dorothy?
Marguerite.
Oh, Marguerite. And did you get to know her at all before you left?
No, those three, I have to say I didn't. Marguerite is, again, a quieter girl. If I were going to compare those three and look at, who would be an instigator of anything, it would have been Elaine. And I have pictures of her, and one particular picture of her, she's about 1.5 years or 2, and she's just got, you can just see her, just the expression on her face is like, I dare you, I dare you. And that's, yeah.
So how old were the 3 younger ones when you left the house?
Okay, if Dorothy's 10 years, I'm 14, Dorothy would have only been about 4.
Okay.
4, 5, 6, 4, 5, 7, somewhere between 4 and 7.
Okay.
So they're, they're almost like a new family for me anyway. I mean, yeah, they were there.
So before you left the home, were you kind of responsible for them in the daily life, or?
Yeah, I don't ever think of feeling that. One of the things that did happen in our household is that, and this is where, again, as a kid, you don't ask questions. Bernice and I have talked, and for some reason or other, we get the sense that Mom may not have been a strong woman physically because Dad, or was it just a thing that Dad felt that Mom did so much that she needed help. So we had what we called hired help. And from the time I can remember, we would have a young girl there helping us. And a lot of those girls may have been indirectly relatives or a neighbor's daughter or somebody in the community, young girl who'd been maybe 16, 17, 18, finished her schooling and would come and work for us, as we called it. So she was she would help Mom. And so although we got jobs to do and had tasks to do, the hired help would be helping Mom most. And I'm thinking that I don't know if we had an awful lot of hired help after I left home. It would have been when I was younger, and maybe it could have been when those 3 younger ones were born. That would have been the most busy time. And Dad was not a man to help in the house. I mean, Dad was outside, and my memory of Dad in terms of helping in the house or doing something for himself are few. The one occasion I can remember, and this I would have been a little older. I wouldn't have been 14. It may have been when I came home from boarding school or even after university. Dad wiping dishes for Mom, but he had to sit on a chair. I mean, that was the extent that Dad helped in the house, or that could. And even after Mom passed away, he did not cook for him. He was not a good cook for himself, and I think in some ways ruined his health to a degree because he lived on peanuts. He had never done anything for himself in that sense. So did we take care of the kids? Yes and no. We had a sandbox they played in, and we did our thing. So I don't ever really recall having to so-called babysit them, because we did have the help that was there. And so if Mom and Dad left and we were at home, there was somebody there to take care of, be responsible for what was going on. So I can't say. I could, just this is something that just comes to mind in terms of visiting and responsibility. I can recall one incident on a Sunday afternoon where we were, as kids, we'd been outside playing, and we had our cousins visiting us, and it was 2 boys, and don't ask me why, but we did. It was a warm afternoon, and we got into the car. My dad smoked, and my uncle smoked. And as kids, I mean, we took the butts and had to have a cigarette. And we smoked. And I guess Mom and Dad and my uncle and aunt, who'd been playing cards in the house, saw us. So when everybody left, Dad sent me downstairs to get the jar of navy beans, which are little white beans for making bean soup or something. But they're called navy beans, and they're little white beans. Bring up the jar of navy beans. What for? He brought them up. He spread some on the floor, 3 spots in corners, and we had to kneel on beans for half an hour as our punishment. Like, I can remember getting what I call the strap from Dad probably twice in my life. That's all. And so I had to have done something really bad. But what it was, I don't know. So Dad didn't give us a lickin', as we would have called it at that time, very often. And he used his razor strap. And it smarted. But these beans were used to remind us he didn't want to ever see us smoke again. Now, to take that further down the road, I tried desperately when I was at university to smoke and hated it. Couldn't understand how anybody could take that stuff and smell like they did, and their clothes smell, and think they were clean and healthy and all that sort of stuff. So smoking, I didn't do. So I can relate to my brother not drinking, because smoking just turned me off. My sister Bernice smoked as soon as she could, not at home, I don't think, like before she left home, and smokes to this day. Didn't cure her.